that they're going to have is in the general election when it's nominee Romney or nominee Santorum or nominee Gingrich. No, it's not going to be nominee Paul. Just putting that out there right now. But the problem that they're going to have, I believe, the Republicans are going to have, is that by assuming that they put the far right budget in a bear hug, those independent and moderate voters who decide elections might not like the idea of taking programs that millions of Americans depend on and then handing them over to states, which, you hand stuff over to states. Are you comfortable that if the government hands $100 over to the state for, say, programs, after-school programs for children, that all $100 will go to, those programs in the state? Maybe you do. I certainly don't. So what you are going to end up happening is a fight over the budget during the middle of a presidential campaign, a continued fight over social issues, which, for a party that says it wants to talk about the economy to suddenly be talking about a whole variety of social issues that they shied away from for at least 3 years. With an improving economy, not one for everyone, hopefully the economy is improving, that their message against the president holds less power. But that being said, it's going to be a very close race. It's going to be a campaign, no matter all the foibles of Mitt Romney and all this singing on the campaign trail, and Rick Santorum and all the things he's been saying on social issues that have angered lots of people, particularly women. I don't need to get into the details of what Rick Santorum's been talking about. If you've been paying attention to some of these things, you know. Lost my train of thought. But you pretty much read where I hope where I'm going. But what I want to leave you with is for those, I guess I'm thinking about particularly Obama supporters who have been sort of down in the dumps, president's been kicked around, knocked around, sort of gotten through bags, poll numbers are high, again-ish for him. I mean, high is like 48, 49. And when you consider the economy and employment rate, that's pretty darn good. But I would caution supporters of the president and also supporters of whoever the Republicans nominate that ultimately those two men will be fighting over probably about 4 to 6% of the electorate, the moderates and independents. And so while last week the president was riding high and everyone was thrilled that this was all locked up and wrapped up, I was cautioning everyone, you're out of mind. We're nowhere close to the election being over. And the final point I want to leave you with before we open it up to Q&A, because you don't want to hear me talk. I want to hear what your questions are about anything. But what is going on with me about this process? I keep losing my train of thought. I have it. What you need to remember is what's going on here in the primary election, as crazy and wacky and hilarious as it is, as disheartening as it might be to Republicans who look at their field and think, oh my God, who are these people? What are they doing to my party? And as wonderful as it might be that the president is riding high and is going to slay his enemy at the ballot box, I mean, not for real. That's not going to be the case once there's an official Republican nominee. There's going to be a huge reset. The first week of September. By September 3rd, when there is a Republican nominee, the race starts over again. All of these things that we've been paying attention to on the Republican side, all the controversies, all the foot and mouth problems of Governor Romney and the foibles of Senator Santorum, assuming either one is the nominee, will be completely forgotten because most folks aren't paying attention to any of this stuff. They will start paying attention in September. And that's when the real race begins. And that is when, if you're not paying attention now, you should be paying attention then, because it'll be very, very interesting. And so on that note, I'd like to remind you again, you can do your housekeeping for you. Remember to go to the mics, ask your questions, and ask any and all questions. I'm much better at Q&A than I am at speeches. Thank you. So giving speeches is absolutely nerve-wracking. So thank you for your forbearance.
Please. Thank you so much for that. My name is Elizabeth Silva, and I work with Youth Children. And my question is basically in regards to what you were just finishing discussing. The Republican Party in the primary has been moving more towards the right. Mitt Romney and Rick Santorum have been arguing about which is the real conservative, and they just have been moving more and more towards the right. And because they're going for that 4 to 6% that's really more moderate, do you think that the Republican candidate is going to, once they are the nominee, move more towards the center? And if so, how do you think they're going to be able to compensate for what many have called the war on women and Latinos that has gone on over the last month?
Thank you for your question. That's a great question because traditionally, in a primary contest, whether it's on the Democratic side or the Republican side, the nominees play to not the, well, I was going to say extremes, that's not fair. Let's say if you're in the Republican Party, you play to the far right. If you're in the Democratic Party, you play to the far left. Because generally speaking, those are the party activists in either party. Those are the folks who knock on the doors, they do the phone banks, they do the leafletting, they actually show up and vote at the primary, at the ballot box, on caucus night in Iowa, when it's a bajillion degrees below zero. These are the folks who you're trying to gin up support from to vote for you. I believe it was, correct me if I'm wrong, I think it was President Nixon who said you run to the right, and then in the primary, you run back to the center in general. And the problem that the Republicans are having, particularly Mitt Romney, who is a moderate Republican, he's a moderate Republican in a party that has moved so far to the right that he has had to move so far to the right on a whole host of issues, particularly on issues of immigration. If you remember at the debate, I mean, personally speaking, I heard him say things that I never thought a moderate Republican from a Northeast state would say to get votes from conservative voters. You're seeing the problem with Romney vis-a-vis Rick Santorum because in the exit polls, people are asking him, is he conservative, moderate, do you think Romney's conservative, is he conservative enough? And Romney always loses on that score. He is never seen either as conservative enough or as a conservative. So let's say Mitt Romney, or even Rick Santorum, or even Speaker Gingrich, he hasn't even run Paul. Let's say any of those guys becomes the nominee. Sure, they will move back to the center. But it's not like they're moving from, say, Chicago, or moving from, say, New York to Chicago to get to the middle. It's like they're coming all the way over from, I don't know, Rome. And I don't think that there's going to be enough time, and certainly given all the things that have been said, particularly on immigration, and certainly on social issues with regard to contraception, birth control, choice, I don't think that they can get close enough to the center for independents and moderates to think that they have changed their ways, changed their thinking. They'll move to the center, but their center will still be, I think, more to the right than where the Republican Party traditionally has been during the election, general election, and certainly where the country is right
Hi, I'm Penny, and we're streaming this live on Ustream today. Folks watching from all over the country. We do have a request when people ask questions, if the speakers, panelists could repeat the questions. And we also have a question from Twitter. Aaron asks, how do partisan battles play out for children in need?
So how many partisan battles play out for children in need? We're about to find out. Usually it usually doesn't bode well. And here's the thing that I've been telling people from all sorts of organizations and advocacy groups, that the folks here in Washington have kicked the can down the road so many times and so far that there's no more road left. There's nothing but a wall or a cliff, depending on who you talk to. And so there are a lot of really horrible decisions that are going to have to be made in the next, certainly within the next 6 months. There's a very sort of sobering piece in the Wall Street Journal, I believe it was Friday, an opinion piece, where the writer said, here are all the time bombs, the physical time bombs that are going to go off by December 31st of 2012, and certainly, just in time for Inauguration Day, January 2013. You have the Bush tax cuts. You have the sequestration rule as a result of the deficit deal, which means if Congress doesn't come up with a plan, that 50% of the budget cuts have to come from defense, and 50% have to come from the regular budget. And because the discretionary budget is really small, those programs are the programs that can least, and the people who depend on those programs, the people who can least afford to get that kind of budgetary hit. So when partisan politics play out here in the Capitol, the folks who are the least powerful, the folks who don't have a powerful lobbyist on their side, major advocates, either outside or inside, are this is the nature of our system. Those programs are in jeopardy. And in even good financial times, maybe you get a bump up in a budget. But because the problems are so great, because the deficits are so huge, everyone's going to have to sacrifice. And the sacrifices are not going to be pleasant. They're not going to be without pain. But I do think that the American people are more than willing to sacrifice if everyone is sacrificing, making the same sacrifices. And so when you hear, and I don't mean to be overly partisan, but when you hear the president and Democrats in particular talking about a balanced approach, where everyone should put in their fair share to solve these problems, I think the American people, if presented with that kind of plan, would support it. The only problem is who has the courage in that big, wedding cake of a building at the other end of Pennsylvania Avenue, who has the courage to make that plan? Some would say Paul Ryan is someone who has that kind of courage to make that plan. But who's going to have the courage to say, okay, Paul, Congressman Ryan, Chairman Ryan, you're right. Let's do this. I'm not sure, even with the cliff facing us, whether there's anyone with enough courage to steer everything in the right direction.
Hi, my name is Anna Sifford. I teach government in Dallas to all seniors. And I have a question that I brought from them to you because I can't answer it in class. Let me first say, thank you for Mayor Bloomberg, so you can see what side of the park, you know.
Okay, I got you.
And this might be sensitive, but it's what seniors are thinking about and the way they're going to work, so I'm going to ask you. I come from a school with a small percentage that some of my students have children of their own, you know, a small percentage of seniors. And what they want to know from me is, as we're talking about contraception and women's rights and all these things with the health care bill, they want to know when are Republicans going to draw the line? Because as we increase the population, as young children are having children, those programs are important. And they're saying if the birth control is being taken away from me, if I can't get access to that and I'm already low income, what's going to happen when the population explodes and there's none of those programs? Aren't the Republicans actually making it worse? That's from the words of the seniors that I can't explain. Which is more important, social or academic, and that's the problem.
Right. So Anna from Dallas, let me repeat the question. So Anna from Dallas has a question from her members of her senior class, many of whom have children of their own, and they want to know when are the Republicans going to draw the line on what they're saying about contraception and choice, because I'm extrapolating, I didn't say this, but if they get their way, then they can make the problem worse in terms of population growth. Here's the one thing about all of the bizarre, scary, frightening things that are being said on the campaign trail about contraception, and then in individual states and what they're doing in those states. The one silver lining that I can see is that this is a primary. These are folks who are appealing to very activated, far-right, and very far-right electorate for whom those issues play very, very well. And Rick Santorum's wife was on a show last night where she vouched for him. He's surrounded by very strong women and he respects women, and sure, he has his views, but he's not going to legislate that way. He has his views. He'll be the president of all Americans. And as with a lot of things that Rick Santorum says, I believe him. And when he says a lot of things, I believe what he's saying. But I also believe that if he were indeed to become president, that I think it would be very difficult for him to follow through on a lot of that. Because I like to remind folks that the president of the United States is not a king, he's not a monarch, he's not a dictator, despite what you might hear from folks who have that view of President Obama. But the president, and I think all presidents find this out, that they get that great house and the great car and that fantastic helicopter and plane, and then they find out that, oh, I can't do that. You mean I've got to get permission from those folks? So President Santorum, I think, would find it very, very difficult to deal with Democrats on Capitol Hill, and particularly in the Senate, assuming Democrats keep the Senate, to get anything done in this regard. I think everyone will move as close as they can to the center on these issues, and given the backlash that's happening on these issues, they'd be very smart to not even go there anymore. Well, yes, you're in Texas. I've got that part.
Everywhere. And the positive, so it's freaking them out as well as me. And so if I could just tell them that it's primary rhetoric, then that would be nice.
It's primary rhetoric on the presidential level, but at the state level, you have to be vigilant. Because governors have a whole lot more power than their president does, which is why more often than not, a governor ends up becoming president because they know what to do. So I don't know if that answers your questions for your seniors, but I got a thumbs up. Oh, here comes Trump. All right.
Thank you, Don, again, for coming out this afternoon. I guess I wanted to ask a question about making social The earlier question about kids being a priority, the fact is that in the debate, we don't hear poverty in the United States or poverty abroad being discussed. So how would you, being based on television and someone working in old media and new media, encourage all of us in this room to try to affect some change, get that question on presidential debates, get it out into the conscience of leaders like you? You hear that email that was the video that went out and 50, 60 million hits on it in the last couple of weeks from a big article in the New York Times. How can we do something like that in the United States to bring the issue of poverty in this country and in other countries around the world to the forefront so that it can make a difference? How would you use the media if you were in our shoes?
So Mark asked, how would I use new media if I were in your shoes trying to affect change? I'm sort of one of these folks who has to put in two different generations. So I work at a newspaper. I get home delivery of the newspaper. I love touching the newspaper and eating on the fingers and reading over large teams, discovering all the things that are in the paper. But then I'm also in this new generation that gets all of its information from online, not just news sites, but Facebook and Twitter and a whole lot of other things you guys are doing that I have no clue how to access what it is. And that's the difference between the tools and technology you have now compared to what I had when I was your age. The idea, I don't know, Mark, if you were talking about the Coney video. I mean, that's a prime example of, leave aside all the trouble that's caused by that. But here you have someone who was deeply concerned about something happening across the world involving children, puts this video up, and it goes like crazy. 20 years ago, even 10 years ago, you would not have been able to do that. You would not have been able to touch as many minds, as many hearts, and get as many people interested in something that they didn't know before. So if you're hoping to make social change, shoot a YouTube video, write a blog, put something on your Facebook page. If you're on Twitter, tweet something out. Use any and all means possible. It used to be that in order for you to get your message out, you would have to be a part of a major organization. You would have to be a part of some larger thing. And now you can be an activist or a visionary, if you will, a change maker, right from sitting right here, right now, tweeting something of what you're thinking about, what moves you, what motivates you, and what you're concerned about. There's no limit to what you can do. I just wonder if, given the problems such as they are, and given how much time it takes, whether folks who do want to make social change, and I'm speaking specifically of young people, whether they have the stamina, the will, the determination to start something at, say, age 16, 17, 22, and stick with it until they feel like they've made a change. And for some, for most, that day when you've achieved everything that you wanted to achieve on something that's really important to you, that day might never come. And so you're going to have to use those victories, no matter how small. It could be affecting one person's life, one family's life, a community, your own community, or a community elsewhere, and using the wonderful energy that you get from helping someone else to propel you to the next bigger, larger task.
Is there anything on this follow? Is there anything you've seen that actually grabs the attention of thought leaders like the Washington Post or New York Times or Daily News? Is it a inflammatory video that goes out there? Because in the U.S., where 1 in 5 kids are living in, 1 in 4 kids are living in poverty, it should be a national disgrace. It should be a national dialogue going on. Abroad, the whole issues that we deal with in Africa and Central and South America, you see Tony in a situation where you have very provocative video, is that what it takes to grab attention nowadays? Yes. Yes, you need to show in such a manner that people will go, oh my God, I can't believe it. Right. One of the things that we have in journalism, particularly I was told by my editor, then editor at Bloomberg News, show, don't tell. That was a way, like, in your writing, being able to bring the person there to the situation or the problem or the story, put them in the room, put them in the place that you're writing about. Now that we have video, you can literally show someone what's wrong, what is the problem, the injustice, what needs to be fixed. There are plenty of things in this country that need to be fixed. It's just a matter of when is someone going to come up with that video, that very evocative story that captures the country's imagination. This is sort of a bit off topic, but the horrifying shooting in Central Florida, the killing of Trayvon Martin, that happened on February 26th. Where now the nation is now whipped up into anger about this because of not only the parents protesting and getting other people involved, but then the 911 tapes came out and people got to listen to those calls. At last I checked, there were 7 of them. Listen to them for themselves and hear and become outraged. And so today you have a possibility where a local horrifying story can explode on the national scene because of social media, because of Facebook, because of Twitter. And Mark, back to your original question about not hearing about poverty in the presidential race. I think if there's any time when we could have a discussion about poverty in all of its facets, it's now. When you have people talking about the 99%, you have people talking about how the 1% keep taking, and yet the 99% are struggling to get by. It's a matter of getting whoever the moderators of these debates, whoever they're going to be, to ask a question certainly about Occupy Wall Street or the 99% versus the 1%, but then to do the follow-up about, okay, well, what about the poor? What about all the children living in poverty? What about the families that are working several jobs just to hold their families together? That's assuming that they have a job. The millions of people who are unemployed, chronically unemployed. There was a time when I think you could go through an entire presidential debate, not talk about poverty at all, particularly when the economy was great. Now, when the economic harm, the economic hardship is so widespread, I think that the time is now to have that kind of conversation. It's just a matter of how will you, as advocates, push to ensure that it becomes a part of the conversation. It's not like the conversation isn't happening. The conversation is happening all over the country. You all are having the conversation. There are lots of conversations in a whole host of other organizations. The problem is, it doesn't seem like anybody in this town is having that same conversation.
Maybe go to one of our young advocates and then come back over on this side if that's okay. Go ahead.
Sorry. My name is Katie. I'm an intern at Children. And my question is, do you think that in the midst of this economic crisis, children's voices have been diminished because they don't have the financial means to share them? And on this, how can we as youth help them change this reality in a world where millionaires can simply write the big check?
I think you answered your own question. Katie asked, and I think that children's voices have been diminished because they don't have the financial wherewithal to have their voices heard.
especially when there are millionaires who can just write a check and drown out other voices. The short answer is yes. I mean, children's voices, young people's voices, even young adult voices don't get heard because traditionally, and politicians know this, young people don't vote. Generally speaking, they don't vote. And certainly when they do vote, they do not vote in the numbers that older Americans vote. And so when a member of Congress is trying to figure out who am I going to listen to, what am I going to support, they're going to listen to the person who is burning up their phone line, burning up their email, most certainly writing checks, which, I mean, unless a kid has an amazing allowance. I mean, I don't know, and it's really sort of forward-thinking, using the allowance to put it into a 527 or donate to a campaign. They're just not geared to listening to young people's voices. Now, the 2008 election, in terms of young people who could vote, that was a milestone because young people did come out and vote. I was one of those people on television who was very skeptical that young people would come out and vote. Since the Obama campaign was basing their entire campaign on, we've got the youth vote, they're going to come out and vote. And I kept saying, I'm sorry, I know the trends, I've seen the trends. Young people don't vote. The guy doesn't come out and vote, and I'm not convinced. Well, they came out and voted in 2008. Stay home like everybody else does in 2010, but the onus is going to be back on young people, especially those of you sitting in this room who are voting age, to come out and vote again in 2012. Not necessarily to vote for President Obama, but if young people are going to have their voices heard, they have to come out and be heard when it's most important, and that's when it's time to vote. The major question about money, the corrupting influence of money in politics, well, that's a question that Congress in Washington has been trying to figure out for decades, and as a result of this campaign, it's only gotten worse, where like you alluded to in your question, I think there might be as many individuals on my hand, maybe five or six, seven, who can just write a gigantic check and keep campaigns afloat. President Trump is still in the race because he had a super PAC to write a check. Newt Gingrich is still in the race. 2/3 ego, but the other third is because he had Adelson writing a check, the Las Vegas entrepreneur writing him a check. Let's say any of these folks win, and let's say you talk about President Obama and the number of big checks that he's getting on many fundraisers that he's holding across the country. People will write checks to candidates for all sorts of reasons. Some of them are altruistic, others are horribly selfish. And when you're writing a 7-figure, 8-figure check to a candidate running for president in a primary, the demands that person will make, assuming that person makes it to the White House, are going to be, well, I wouldn't want to guess, but I wouldn't think they'd be great.
We got time probably for 2 more questions.
My name is Maury Middleton, and I'm a sponsor of a rural in Mali, Africa, and I live in rural Pinal County, Arizona. I've got a question. With the outlook of the 2012 elections, how will this affect the rural after-school programs in rural America? Like daycare centers, schools, and YMCAs, and that are funded by federal programs.
So Maury from Arizona asked, his question was about how will the 2012 election impact or affect rural education, rural schools. And I mean, Maury, your question, my answer goes back to an answer before, which is the budget situation. Leave aside what anyone says on the campaign trail, in terms of what they're going to do if they become president, particularly on the Republican side and pay a little more attention to what the president says, because he's the president, he sees the books, and even with presidents are supposed to be rosy and optimistic and looking forward, but you all know the deficits are huge, the spending is huge, and something is going to have to be done. There are going to be, as I said before, some really tough decisions that are going to have to be made, and lots of sacrifices made by people who have been sacrificing for decades already. And sacrifices made by people who haven't had to make them, but because of the economic implosion in 2008, had no choice to. And so, as I said before, when those sacrifices are being made, I do think that, as tough as they're going to be, that the American people will be okay with, I'm not saying happy, okay with making sacrifices if everyone is making sacrifices. And so, just personally speaking, if the wealthy 1% or the wealthy 5% are not, well, let's say the Bush tax cuts for the wealthy are extended, and the tax cuts for the middle class are allowed to go up, that's not fair. That's not equal sacrifice. And so, when it comes time to make those tough decisions, a lot of things are going to get hammered, and you can get a vision of what those sacrifices are going to be when you look at Paul Ryan's budget. And I encourage you to look at Paul Ryan's budget, because that's the Republican marker. Look at the president's budget, because that is the president's marker. Go back and reread the stories about the $4 trillion grand bargain, because those yourself and find out what this framework looks like, how you fit in or don't fit in, and how you can possibly use that knowledge and use what you're discovering to ensure that whatever this budget numbers. So, sorry, Mark, I don't have a specific answer for you, but if you keep all of that in mind, it'll help prepare you for the even bigger fight that's to come.
I think this will be the last question.
Hi, I'm Anita Zoot from Jackson, Tennessee. And how do you think students like me can really make the presidential candidate specifically fight for child nutrition?
How can you make how can a young person make sure that a presidential candidate fights child nutrition, fights for child nutrition? That is a good question. It's a tough question. I think what you need to do, Anita, is go to the websites of Capehart and Paul Romney and President Obama. See what they say about child nutrition. If they don't say anything about child nutrition, that's a clue in terms of where this fits in to their priorities for the country. if they do have something about child nutrition on their websites, how specific are they? Are they specific enough? Is it just a bullet point and no specificity? Once you've gotten that, then it's time to start asking questions. And this is where social media and your friends who are hooked in can be a really great help. Find the email of the policy person, find the Twitter handle, find whatever, the email, whatever you can find, Facebook address, and just start bombarding them with questions. You and your friends and your fellow advocates, it's not that you're asking an unreasonable question. It's not like you're asking for state secrets. You want to know, what are they going to do to fight for child nutrition? I mean, it's as basic as that. And if they don't have an answer, then you blast that out, however you can. I'm sure I should know this, and I don't. I'm sorry, but maybe at some point, say to the children, you guys keep report cards. So, someone gets an F, someone gets a D, someone gets a B minus. Does anyone ever get an A? Oh, on people, on candidates. On the candidates. No. Okay, well, I'll take that. Even if you're wrong. You're an individual, you and your friends can get together and say, you know what? Governor Romney has an interesting plan on child nutrition, but here's where we think he should do more. Here's where we think he could do better. I mean, child nutrition, fighting for child nutrition should not be a partisan issue. It should be an American issue. And so, for president, it should be something that you haven't answered for when you're asked. Great.
I think the applause are getting to it. No, I know you have a train to catch, and certainly on behalf of Save the Children, I want to thank you for a terrific presentation.
Thank you.
We've heard a real dose of realism. I think we've heard some somber notes. We've also heard some real inspiration. But I think overall, it's really been a fabulous job setting the scene for our discussions tomorrow, where we really are going to focus in on child malnutrition here at home, as well as overseas, and then in the afternoon go up and carry that message to members of Congress so they will really hear about it. I think you gave some very great ideas. His idea of scorecard is a terrific one. We actually do one on the states, and there's disaster preparedness, and Mark and his team have launched that kind of project. And we're looking in other areas to do that kind of thing. It's a little tricky to do on individual candidates. I'm sure you can appreciate it for a nonprofit. But thank you. I do want to thank you again for being with us this afternoon. Very much appreciate it.
Thank you. Thanks again.